Welcome to today's episode of Ancient Migrations, where we explore the extraordinary journeys that shaped human civilization. Picture this: 75,000 years ago, a small band of early humans stands at the edge of the African continent, gazing across the narrow strait that separates them from the Arabian Peninsula. The morning mist rises from the Red Sea, creating ethereal bridges between two worlds. Behind them lies everything they've ever known: the savannahs where their ancestors evolved over millions of years, the familiar rhythms of seasonal rains that have governed life for countless generations, the well-worn paths between water sources and hunting grounds that their grandparents' once traveled. The leader of this small group, a weathered woman whose hands bear the scars of countless tool-making sessions, points toward the distant shore. Her eyes, sharp from years of reading landscapes and weather patterns, have spotted something that others might miss: a green tinge to the usually brown hills across the water, suggesting recent rains and the promise of fresh vegetation. She speaks in a language we couldn't understand, but her gestures are universal: possibility, hope, and determination. But these aren't the first humans to make this crossing. Archaeological evidence suggests that waves of our ancestors had been testing these boundaries for millennia, driven by forces both environmental and social that we're only beginning to understand. Some returned with tales of harsh deserts and failed attempts. Others never returned at all, their fates unknown, but their courage remembered in the stories passed down around evening fires. What made them leave the security of familiar territories? The answer lies in a complex web of climate change, population pressure, and that uniquely human trait: curiosity. What drew them to specific valleys and river systems thousands of miles away? How did they know, without maps or GPS, which directions would lead to prosperity rather than disaster? And why did they choose to settle in the fertile crescents of Mesopotamia, the Nile Delta, the Indus Valley, and the Yellow River basin, regions that would become the foundation stones of human civilization? The story we're about to unfold challenges everything we thought we knew about early human migration. This isn't a simple tale of wandering nomads stumbling upon good land through blind luck. Instead, it's a complex narrative of climate-driven necessity, strategic adaptation, and remarkable ingenuity that reveals our ancestors as sophisticated environmental strategists. They weren't just surviving in a hostile world. They were actively seeking out the most promising landscapes on Earth, reading environmental clues we're only now learning to interpret, and transforming these valleys into the birthplaces of agriculture, cities, writing, and civilization itself. Chapter 1: The Great Departure. The African morning sun cast long shadows across the grasslands as a small group of early humans prepared for what would become the most consequential journey in human history. The dew still clung to the acacia leaves, and the air carried the complex symphony of sounds that meant safety: bird calls, insect buzzes, the distant lowing of gazelles. But beneath these familiar sounds lay an undertone of change that every member of the group could sense, even if they couldn't articulate it. Kessie, a young mother carrying her infant son in a sling woven from plant fibers, touched the worn groove in her favorite digging stick, a tool her mother had made for her, and her mother's mother before that. The wood was polished smooth by generations of hands, its tip hardened by fire and sharpened by patient scraping against stones. It represented continuity, tradition, the accumulated wisdom of countless seasons spent reading the landscape for food, water, and safety. But the landscape was changing. The rains that had come predictably for as long as anyone could remember were becoming erratic. Waterholes that had sustained their community for generations were drying up earlier each season. The great herds of antelope that provided meat and hides were shifting their migration routes, following new patterns that the elders couldn't predict. Most troubling of all, other human groups were encroaching on territories that had been there since time immemorial, pushed by their own environmental pressures. This wasn't their first attempt to leave their ancestral homeland. Nor would it be their last, but something was different this time. The scouting parties that had ventured north and east in previous seasons had returned with stories that sparked hope rather than despair. They spoke of lands where water flowed year-round, where wild grains grew so thickly you could gather a basket full in an afternoon, where the soil was black and rich rather than the familiar red clay of home. Climate research reveals that these early migrations occurred in waves approximately every 20,000 years, triggered by Earth's orbital patterns and corresponding changes in climate. These astronomical cycles, caused by variations in Earth's distance from the Sun and the tilt of its axis, created what scientists call green corridors, temporary bridges of lush vegetation that connected Africa to the rest of the world. During favorable climate phases, the Sahara transformed from an impenetrable desert into a landscape of lakes, rivers, and grasslands. Archaeological evidence shows that during these wet periods, human settlements extended far into what is now barren desert. Lake Chad, for instance, was once larger than the Caspian Sea, supporting thriving communities of fishers and hunters. These green corridors didn't last forever. They opened and closed according to climate cycles, creating windows of opportunity that lasted centuries or millennia before closing again. You must understand that these early humans weren't primitive wanderers driven by simple desperation. By 75,000 years ago, Homo sapiens possessed sophisticated cognitive abilities that had been developing for tens of thousands of years. They had language, not the simple grunts and gestures often portrayed in popular media, but complex spoken languages capable of conveying abstract concepts, detailed environmental knowledge, and complex social relationships. Their migration wasn't random wandering. It was strategic exploration based on careful observation and planning. Archaeological evidence suggests they followed specific routes, timing their movements to coincide with favorable environmental conditions. They possessed detailed knowledge of seasonal patterns, animal behavior, plant life cycles, and water sources that allowed them to predict where resources would be available weeks or months in advance. The tools they carried represented thousands of years of accumulated technological innovation. Their stone implements weren't crude rocks picked up at random, but carefully crafted instruments designed for specific purposes. A skilled toolmaker could produce a sharp cutting edge from a piece of flint in minutes, but creating the perfect hunting spear or food processing tool required hours of patient work and generations of accumulated knowledge about stone types, fracture, patterns, and edge maintenance. The journey began around 100,000 years ago, though recent research suggests this date should be pushed back even further, with evidence of human presence outside Africa as early as 180,000 years ago. Rather than a single great exodus, genetic and archaeological evidence points to multiple migration waves, each representing a separate group of pioneers testing different routes and strategies for expansion. Picture these small groups of 20 to 30 individuals carrying everything they owned in portable bundles, stone tools, wrapped in animal hides containers, made from gourds or hollowed wood for water storage, dried meat, and gathered foods for the journey, and perhaps, most importantly, the accumulated knowledge of their ancestors passed down through oral traditions. Children learned by watching and imitating adults, absorbing practical skills alongside cultural knowledge that would prove crucial for survival in new environments. These migrants faced challenges we can barely imagine today. Cold, arid conditions during the first half of the last ice age created a hostile environment where a single mistake in navigation or resource management could mean death for the entire group. Temperatures in some regions were 10 to 15 degrees Celsius colder than today, with rainfall patterns completely different from those they had known in Africa. Yet periodic warm phases every 20,000 years opened windows of opportunity when grasslands expanded, rivers flowed more regularly, and animal populations increased. The psychological challenges were perhaps even greater than the physical ones. Leaving familiar territory meant abandoning the graves of ancestors, the sacred places where important events had occurred, and the detailed environmental knowledge that had been built up over generations. Each group that ventured into unknown territory was gambling their lives on the possibility that they could learn new landscapes quickly enough to survive. The region's position at the intersection of 3 continents made it a natural corridor for migration, but its appeal went far deeper. The climate was more predictable than the extreme variability they had known in Africa. Water sources were more reliable, fed by snowmelt from mountain ranges and sustained by Mediterranean weather patterns. The diversity of ecological niches, from coastal plains to inland valleys to mountain slopes, provided security through environmental diversity. As these early pioneers crossed into the Levant, they encountered environments unlike anything they had known in Africa. The seasonal patterns were different, with wet winters and dry summers rather than the monsoon patterns of their homeland. The plant and animal species were unfamiliar, requiring rapid learning about which foods were safe and nutritious, which materials could be used for tools and shelter, and which animals could be hunted successfully. Yet they adapted with remarkable speed, demonstrating cognitive flexibility that would become one of humanity's greatest advantages. They developed new hunting strategies suited to different prey species. They modified their tools to work with local stone types that had different fracture properties than African flints. They learned to exploit resources they had never encountered before: new types of nuts and grains, different fish species, and animals with behaviors unlike those they had hunted in Africa. The learning process was accelerated by their sophisticated social organization. Knowledge gained by one individual was quickly shared with the group through language, demonstration, and collaborative problem-solving. Mistakes were analyzed and remembered. Successes were replicated and refined. Each group that entered a new territory was building on the accumulated experience of all who had gone before. What drove them forward wasn't just necessity. It was the intoxicating experience of discovery. Each valley they entered, each river system they followed, revealed new possibilities that had never existed in their homeland. The region that would become known as the Fertile Crescent was more temperate than it is today, with fertile soil, 2 great rivers, and hills and mountains that provided diverse ecological niches packed into a relatively small area. This landscape offered something unprecedented in human experience: the potential for a year-round settlement in a single location. For hundreds of thousands of years, human survival had required constant movement in search of resources. The idea of staying in one place for months or even years at a time represented a revolutionary concept that would fundamentally alter human society. The psychological impact of this discovery cannot be overstated. For the first time in human history, our ancestors glimpsed the possibility of permanent homes, of building something lasting, rather than constantly moving in search of resources. They could imagine accumulating possessions beyond what could be carried, developing deeper relationships with specific places, and creating communities that would outlast individual lifespans. This realization would fundamentally alter the trajectory of human development, setting the stage for agriculture, cities, and civilization itself. But in that moment, standing in their first permanent campsite along a Middle Eastern river, these early migrants were simply people who had found a better way to live. Chapter 2: Following the Rivers of Life. The sound of flowing water has always been music to human ears, and for our migrating ancestors, rivers represented far more than just drinking water. They were highways to the future, lifelines that promised to survival, and teachers that would transform nomadic bands into the founders of civilization. As early humans spread across the Fertile Crescent and beyond, they developed an almost magnetic attraction to major river systems, recognizing intuitively what we now understand scientifically. Rivers provided not just water, but fertile soil from annual flooding, easy transportation, and abundant food resources that could support larger populations than any other landscape feature. Consider the moment when the first humans crested a hill in what is now southern Iraq and saw the Euphrates River stretching toward the horizon like a silver ribbon through the landscape. The immediate sensory impact must have been overwhelming. The sound of flowing water after weeks of travel through semi-arid terrain, the sight of green vegetation extending far beyond what any single water source had supported in their experience, the smell of rich, moist earth so different from the dry soils they had known. But beyond these immediate sensory pleasures lay profound implications that these early humans may have only gradually understood. The Tigris and Euphrates River valleys form the northeastern portion of the Fertile Crescent, and the geography here presented both opportunities and challenges that would profoundly shape human civilization. The geography of southern Mesopotamia was such that agriculture was possible only with irrigation and good drainage, facts that would have profound effects on the evolution of early human society. The immediate benefits were obvious to any experienced forager: fresh water for drinking, fish and waterfowl for food, and riverside vegetation that attracted game animals. Clay deposits along riverbanks provided raw materials for tools and eventually pottery. Reeds could be woven into baskets, mats, and even boats. But the long-term implications were revolutionary, though it may have taken generations for humans to fully understand what they had discovered. Rivers taught our ancestors critical lessons about timing, planning, and the complex relationships between environmental systems. The annual flooding of these rivers followed predictable patterns that were initially mysterious, but gradually became comprehensible through patient observation. The floods weren't random disasters, but carefully orchestrated natural events that deposited nutrient sediment across floodplains, creating conditions ideal for plant growth. Early humans had to learn to read these patterns with the precision of modern meteorologists. They needed to understand when floods would come, how high they would rise, which areas would be inundated, and when the waters would recede, leaving behind rich soil perfect for cultivation. This required developing new concepts of time and causation that went far beyond the immediate cause and effect relationships that had governed hunting and gathering. The learning process was accelerated by the fact that different river systems followed different patterns, requiring constant adaptation and refinement of environmental knowledge. The Euphrates, fed by snowmelt from Turkish and Iranian mountains, had different timing than rivers fed by monsoon rains. Spring floods arrived at different times and lasted for different durations depending on winter snowfall and spring temperatures hundreds of miles away. But following rivers required new skills and technologies that had never been necessary for inland foraging. Boats became essential for transportation, whether simple reed vessels for crossing streams or more sophisticated craft for traveling longer distances. The development of watercraft wasn't just about mobility. It represented a fundamental shift in how humans related to their environment, from passive adaptation to active manipulation of natural forces. The earliest boats were probably simple affairs: bundles of reeds lashed together, hollowed logs, or animal skins stretched over wooden frames. But even these crude vessels opened new possibilities for exploration, fishing, and transportation that transformed human capabilities. Rivers that had been barriers became highways. Fish and waterfowl that had been inaccessible became regular food sources. Travel that had been limited to walking pace suddenly accelerated to the speed of current flow. The Nile River system presented different challenges and opportunities that required different solutions and adaptations. Unlike the unpredictable floods of Mesopotamia, which could vary dramatically from year to year, the Nile's annual inundation was remarkably consistent, rising slowly over a period of months, reaching its peak in September, and then receding back to normal levels by November. This predictability allowed for more sophisticated planning and eventually supported one of history's most stable and long-lasting civilizations. Early humans settling along the Nile developed what might be called the first environmental calendar, a systematic approach to time management based on natural cycles rather than arbitrary human conventions. They learned to time their activities around the river's rhythms, moving to higher ground during floods, preparing tools and materials during the inundation period when travel was limited, and taking advantage of the rich soil left behind as waters receded. This systematic approach to environmental management marked a crucial step in human development, demonstrating increasing ability to think in terms of long-term cycles and delayed gratification. Instead of simply reacting to environmental changes as they occurred, humans were learning to anticipate and prepare for them, developing the planning capabilities that would eventually enable agriculture and urban civilization. The Nile's predictability also allowed for more sophisticated understanding of cause and effect, relationships in natural systems. Humans could observe that specific events in one season, the amount of rainfall in distant mountains, the timing of snowmelt, the intensity of seasonal winds, had predictable consequences months later. This understanding of distant causation would prove crucial for the development of agriculture and eventually scientific thinking. The Indus River system, flowing down from the Himalayas through what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, offered yet another model of human-river interaction that required different adaptations and innovations. The Indus River would flood twice per year with remarkable reliability, providing more available calories per acre than any other river system of its time. This abundance supported population densities previously impossible in human history, leading to the development of sophisticated urban centers like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. What's remarkable about these early river followers is how quickly they adapted to different hydrological systems, developing the cognitive flexibility that would become one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. The same groups that learned to manage the violent, unpredictable floods of Mesopotamia also developed techniques for dealing with the gentle, seasonal inundations of the Nile. Different rivers required different boat designs, different fishing techniques, different seasonal calendars, and different social organizations for managing communal resources. This adaptability speaks to sophisticated observation skills and the ability to modify established practices based on local conditions. Early humans weren't simply applying rigid behavioral patterns learned in one environment to all new situations. Instead, they were constantly experimenting, observing results, and refining their approaches based on feedback from the environment. Rivers also served as communication networks, spreading innovations and ideas across vast distances with unprecedented speed. Trade networks developed along these waterways, allowing for the exchange of goods, technologies, and cultural practices between distant communities. A new tool design developed in one valley could spread hundreds of miles in a matter of months, carried by traders and migrants following the water highways. The development of river-based trade required new social institutions and technologies. Boats had to be standardized to some degree to allow for reliable transportation. Trade agreements had to be negotiated between communities that might speak different languages and follow different customs. Storage and preservation techniques had to be developed to maintain goods during long journeys. Most importantly, rivers enabled the development of specialized production for trade rather than just local consumption. Communities could focus on producing goods for which they had particular advantages: high-quality stone tools near good quarries, preserved fish in areas with abundant fisheries, or woven goods where fiber plants grew particularly well. This specialization increased overall productivity and created the economic foundations for complex societies. The psychological impact of river following cannot be ignored. These waterways provided not just practical benefits, but also a sense of direction and purpose that may have been crucial for maintaining morale during long migrations. Instead of wandering aimlessly across landscapes of uncertain potential, human groups could follow clear paths toward unknown but promising territories. Rivers became metaphors for journey and destination, flow and permanence, concepts that would later appear in human art, mythology, and philosophy. The idea of life as a journey along a river with sources and destinations became embedded in human consciousness in ways that continue to influence our thinking today. Many of the world's great philosophical and religious traditions include river symbolism that traces back to these early experiences of river-following migrations. Chapter 3. The First Farmers. The transformation from hunter-gatherer to farmer represents one of the most dramatic shifts in human history. And it didn't happen overnight or through sudden inspiration. Picture a group of early humans in the hills of southeastern Turkey, around 11,000 years ago, returning to their favorite seasonal campsite after a long winter spent in more protected valleys. An elderly woman named Asha, whose weathered hands carry the accumulated wisdom of decades spent gathering wild foods, notices something remarkable about the wild wheat growing near their old fire hearths. The wheat stalks are taller than she remembers, their heads fuller and heavier with grain. But more than that, the spacing between plants seems more regular, the growth more uniform than in the wild stands they usually harvest. She kneels in the morning sunlight, running her fingers through the grain heads, and realizes that something has changed in the years since they were last here. Year after year, her people had returned to this same location during harvest season. And each time, the grain seemed more abundant, the stalks more cooperative, the seeds larger and easier to process. Fig trees were among the first plants cultivated by humans, appearing in modern-day Jordan by around 11,300 BCE. But the cultivation of these trees tells us something important about how agriculture actually developed. It wasn't sudden inspiration that led to farming. It was the accumulation of small observations and minor modifications that gradually transformed wild management into deliberate cultivation. The process likely began with what archaeologists call wild management or proto-horticulture, small interventions in natural systems that enhanced yields without fundamentally changing the relationship between humans and plants. Hunter-gatherers who collected grains would naturally bring them back to camp to process, separating edible seeds from inedible chaff. During this processing, some seeds inevitably fell to the ground around the campsite, enriching the soil with organic matter from food scraps and human waste. When humans returned to the same campsite the following year, either because it offered good hunting, reliable water, or protection from weather, they found cereals growing around their old settlement. These weren't wild stands growing in random locations, but concentrated patches of grain growing in soil that had been inadvertently enriched by human activity. The plants were often healthier and more productive than those in completely wild locations. This accidental cultivation gradually became intentional as people realized they could influence the growth and abundance of their food sources. They began to notice which activities promoted plant growth and which harmed it. Clearing competing vegetation around useful plants increased yields. Watering plants during dry periods kept them alive when wild ones died. Most importantly, selecting the largest, most productive seeds for replanting gradually improved the characteristics of domesticated varieties. The Nachafian culture, flourishing between 12,500 and 9,500 BCE in the Levant, represents a crucial bridge between hunting-gathering and agriculture that shows us how this transition actually occurred. These semi-nomadic people established seasonal villages and began the systematic cultivation of wild cereals, but they didn't immediately abandon hunting and gathering. Instead, they developed a mixed economy that combined traditional foraging with increasingly sophisticated plant management. The Natufians developed the first specialized harvesting tools, curved blades set into wooden or bone handles that could efficiently cut grain stalks without losing seeds. These sickles represented more than just improved technology. They demonstrated commitment to grain harvesting as a major economic activity worthy of specialized tool development. The time and skill required to make these tools was considerable, indicating that grain collection had become important enough to justify significant technological investment. Archaeological sites from this period reveal houses built for long-term occupation rather than temporary shelter, storage pits for preserving grain between seasons, and grinding stones heavy enough that they couldn't be easily transported. These features suggest that Natufian communities were beginning to think in terms of permanent settlement and long-term resource management rather than the immediate consumption patterns typical of mobile foraging societies. The psychological shift required for farming was perhaps more profound than the technological one. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans have been mobile, following resources as they became available and consuming food as it was found. Farming required them to stay in one place for extended periods, to invest time and energy in future harvests rather than immediate returns, and to delay gratification in ways that had never been necessary for survival. This required developing new concepts of time and causation that went beyond the immediate feedback loops of hunting and gathering. A hunter who shoots an arrow knows immediately whether the shot was successful. A gatherer who finds edible plants can consume them on the spot. But a farmer plants seeds with the expectation that months of proper care will eventually yield a harvest. This delayed gratification demanded entirely new forms of patience and planning. The spread of agriculture from the Near East into Europe occurred at an average speed of about 1 kilometer per year, a pace that seems slow by modern standards, but was actually quite rapid for prehistoric human movement. Importantly, this spread was carried by actual migration of farming peoples rather than just the transmission of knowledge. Entire communities were relocating, bringing their domesticated plants and animals to new territories rather than simply teaching local populations how to farm. This pattern of migration-driven agricultural spread tells us something important about early farming. The knowledge required for successful agriculture was complex and embedded in cultural practices that couldn't be easily transmitted through casual contact. Farming communities possessed detailed understanding of plant breeding, soil management, seasonal timing, food processing, and storage techniques that had been refined over generations of trial and error. These storage facilities represented more than just practical necessities. They were investments in the future and physical manifestations of human confidence in their ability to control their environment. A community that built substantial grain storage was betting that they would remain in the same location long enough to use the stored food and that they could protect their accumulated resources from theft or spoilage. The design of early storage facilities reveals sophisticated understanding of preservation principles. Granaries were often raised off the ground to prevent moisture damage and rodent access. They included features for controlling airflow and temperature to prevent spoilage. Some included multiple chambers to separate different types of grain or to isolate damaged portions from the rest of the stored food. The domestication of animals proceeded alongside plant cultivation, creating integrated agricultural systems that were more productive and reliable than either plant or animal management alone. Cattle were first domesticated around 8,500 BCE, likely from wild ox or aurochs in the Near East. And genetic analysis suggests that all modern cattle descend from as few as 80 originally domesticated animals. This represents an extraordinary example of human selectivity and breeding expertise applied over many generations. The domestication process required understanding animal behavior, breeding patterns, nutritional needs, and social dynamics in ways that went far beyond simple hunting. Early herders had to learn which animals were suitable for domestication, how to maintain breeding populations, how to provide appropriate food and shelter, and how to manage animal reproduction to ensure sustainable herd growth. Farming communities developed increasingly sophisticated understanding of soil management, crop rotation, and selective breeding through generations of careful observation and experimentation. They experimented with different plant varieties, sometimes abandoning crops that didn't perform well in specific locations and returning to them thousands of years later with improved techniques or better environmental conditions. This experimental approach demonstrates remarkable patience and systematic thinking. Agricultural innovations often require decades or centuries to perfect, with improvements accumulating gradually through small modifications rather than sudden breakthroughs. Communities that succeeded in agriculture were those that could maintain experimental programs across multiple generations. The social implications of agriculture were revolutionary, creating entirely new forms of human organization and cooperation. With surplus food production, population expanded and communities developed specialized workers and more advanced tools. For the first time in human history, not everyone needed to be directly involved in food production, freeing individuals to develop crafts, maintain religious practices, organize defense, and create the complex social structures that would eventually become civilization. Specialization created new social roles and identities that hadn't existed in hunter-gatherer societies. Craft specialists could develop expertise in pottery, weaving, tool-making, or construction that exceeded what any individual could achieve while also participating in food production. Religious specialists could maintain ritual knowledge and ceremonial practices that reinforced community, solidarity, and transmitted cultural knowledge across generations. The fertile valleys provided ideal laboratories for agricultural experimentation because they offered environmental conditions that maximized the chances of success for early farmers. The Fertile Crescent happened to be home to a wide range of plants and animals that lent themselves to domestication, including the 8 Neolithic founder crops important in early agriculture: emmer wheat, einkorn, barley, flax, chickpea, pea, lentil, and bitter vetch. This concentration of domesticable species was entirely accidental. It reflected the unique ecological conditions that made these valleys so attractive to early farmers. The climate was more predictable than many other regions, with sufficient rainfall for rain-fed agriculture and river systems that could support irrigation when needed. The topographic diversity provided multiple ecological niches within relatively small areas, allowing communities to experiment with different crops and animals without traveling great distances. Chapter 4. Masters of water management became the defining skill of early civilizations, transforming scattered farming communities into organized societies capable of supporting thousands of people in permanent settlements. In the sweltering heat of a Mesopotamian summer around 7,000 years ago, a group of human engineers stood surveying the landscape between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, their minds wrestling with a challenge that had never before been attempted in human history: how to control the flow of entire river systems to serve human purposes. Picture Enlil, a seasoned water manager whose calloused hands bore the scars of decades spent digging channels and building embankments. He stood on a natural rise overlooking the floodplain, using a simple plumb line and his experienced eye to calculate gradients and flow rates. Behind him, teams of workers waited for his instructions, carrying tools made of wood, bone, and stone that represented the cutting edge of hydraulic technology. What they were planning would become one of humanity's greatest achievements: controlled irrigation on a scale that would transform entire landscapes. The need for irrigation led the Sumerians, and later the Akkadians, to build their cities along the Tigris and Euphrates and their tributaries. But irrigation wasn't just about bringing water to crops. It was about reimagining the fundamental relationship between humans and their environment. These early engineers were essentially creating artificial rivers, manipulating the flow of water across vast landscapes to serve human purposes, rather than simply accepting natural water distribution as unchangeable. The first irrigation systems were remarkably sophisticated, representing engineering achievements that rival modern projects in their complexity and ambition. Picture networks of canals stretching for dozens of miles, with carefully calculated gradients that had to be precise enough to ensure proper flow rates across varying terrain. Too steep, and the water would flow too quickly, eroding the channels and flooding the fields with destructive force. Too gentle, and the water would pool and stagnate, creating breeding grounds for disease and salt buildup that could destroy soil fertility for generations. The engineering challenges were immense, requiring skills and knowledge that had never before been necessary for human survival. Early irrigation engineers had to survey terrain using primitive tools, calculate water volumes without mathematical formulas, design distribution systems that could serve multiple communities, and create maintenance protocols that would keep the systems functioning across seasons and years. They relied on empirical observation, systematic trial and error, and accumulated generational knowledge passed down through specialized guilds of water managers. Consider the complexity of the surveying work alone. These engineers had to map elevation changes across vast landscapes, identify optimal routes for main canals, locate appropriate sites for distribution points, and plan drainage systems to prevent waterlogging. They used tools like the A-frame level, a simple but effective device consisting of a wooden triangle with a plumb line that could determine whether ground was level or sloped. With patience and skill, surveyors could map elevation changes accurate enough to guide canal construction across miles of terrain. The Egyptians developed irrigation systems from the Nile River that were more complex than previous systems, including innovations like the rotation of legumes with cereals to prevent salt buildup and enhance soil fertility. This agricultural technique demonstrates sophisticated understanding of soil chemistry and crop management that wouldn't be rediscovered in some parts of the world for thousands of years. Egyptian irrigation engineers had to solve different problems than their Mesopotamian counterparts because the Nile's behavior was more predictable but also more constraining. The annual flood came at a specific time and lasted for a specific duration, creating a narrow window for capturing and distributing water. Engineers developed elaborate systems of basins and channels that could capture floodwater and hold it on agricultural land for optimal periods. The basin irrigation system used natural topography and artificial embankments to create large flooded areas that could be drained systematically as the flood receded. This required understanding not just water flow, but also soil types, drainage rates, and crop water requirements. Different crops needed different flooding durations, so the system had to be flexible enough to accommodate diverse agricultural needs. Consider the seasonal water management challenges that early irrigation engineers had to solve. Rivers like the Nile had predictable flood cycles, but farmers had to capture and store this seasonal abundance for use during dry periods when the river was at its lowest levels. This required sophisticated reservoir systems, controlled flooding techniques, and precise timing of agricultural activities that demanded unprecedented levels of planning and coordination. A miscalculation in water management could mean crop failure and starvation for entire communities, making water engineers some of the most crucial and respected members of early agricultural societies. These specialists developed detailed knowledge of river behavior, weather patterns, soil types, and crop requirements that made them indispensable for community survival. Their expertise was literally the difference between abundance and disaster. The social implications of irrigation were as significant as the technological ones, creating entirely new forms of political organization and social hierarchy. Water management created what scholars call hydraulic empires, where control of water resources became the basis for political power and social organization. Those who controlled the canals controlled the food supply, leading to the development of centralized administrations and hierarchical societies that could coordinate large-scale infrastructure projects. Water management also required unprecedented levels of cooperation between communities that had previously operated independently. Irrigation systems often spanned multiple settlements, requiring coordination of labor, shared investment in infrastructure, and agreed-upon rules for water distribution. This cooperation laid the foundation for larger political entities and eventually contributed to the formation of the first states. The development of water laws and administrative systems emerged directly from the practical needs of irrigation management. Communities had to establish rules for water allocation during both abundant and scarce periods, protocols for system maintenance, and mechanisms for resolving disputes between upstream and downstream users. These legal innovations represented some of humanity's first attempts at formal governance and conflict resolution. The development of water-lifting technologies marked another crucial advancement in human engineering capability. Simple devices like the shaduf, a counterbalance beam used to lift water from rivers or wells, multiplied human capacity to move water against gravity, enabling irrigation of land that couldn't be reached by gravity flow systems. These mechanical innovations represented early examples of humans using tools to amplify their physical capabilities, a principle that would drive technological development for millennia. More sophisticated water-lifting devices appeared as communities gained experience with irrigation engineering. The Archimedes screw, the water wheel, and various forms of pumps enabled farmers to lift water to higher elevations and extend irrigation to previously unusable land. Each innovation expanded the area that could be farmed and increased the reliability of water supply during dry periods. Canal maintenance became a crucial social activity that required seasonal mobilization of entire communities and created natural rhythms for community organization. Regular clearing of channels to remove accumulated sediment, repair of embankments damaged by floods or erosion, and redistribution of soil deposits demanded coordinated labor and central planning. These maintenance cycles reinforced the cooperative bonds necessary for agricultural societies and provided opportunities for communities to address other shared concerns. The maintenance work also required sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering principles. Workers had to know how to repair earthen embankments without creating weak spots, how to clear channels without damaging their structure, and how to modify water flow patterns to address changing conditions. This practical engineering knowledge was preserved and transmitted through apprenticeship systems that created professional classes of water managers. The mastery of water also enabled trade and transportation on unprecedented scales, transforming local irrigation systems into regional and eventually intercontinental networks. Rivers and canals became highways for goods and people, connecting distant communities and enabling the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. What began as agricultural infrastructure evolved into the transportation networks that supported early urban civilizations. Navigation on artificial waterways required new skills and technologies different from those needed for natural rivers. Canal systems had predictable water levels and flow rates, but they also had locks, weirs, and other control structures that required specialized knowledge to navigate safely. The development of canal transportation created new occupational specialties and contributed to the growing complexity of early urban economies. Water management expertise became a form of cultural capital that was transmitted through specialized knowledge systems and professional guilds. Master irrigators held positions of tremendous social importance, their knowledge literally meaning the difference between abundance and famine for entire communities. This specialized expertise contributed to social stratification and the development of professional classes within early civilizations, creating new forms of social identity based on technical knowledge rather than kinship or warfare. Chapter 5. The Birth of Cities. The first cities emerged not as grand designs conceived by visionary planners, but as organic responses to abundance that gradually coalesced into something unprecedented in human experience. Imagine standing in a fertile valley around 6,000 years ago, witnessing the gradual transformation of what had once been a successful farming village into something that had never existed before. A permanent settlement housing thousands of people, engaged in dozens of specialized occupations connected by trade networks, spanning hundreds of miles, and organized by social institutions complex enough to coordinate the activities of people who might never meet face to face. By the 7th millennium BCE, the alluvial plains of Mesopotamia began to be cultivated systematically, and by the 4th millennium, the first true cities appeared in response to the need for efficient agricultural administration and the opportunities created by agricultural surplus. These weren't just larger villages or aggregations of family compounds. They represented a fundamentally new form of human organization, with implications that would reshape civilization forever and establish patterns of urban life that persist to this day. The transition from village to city required solving numerous unprecedented challenges that no human society had ever faced. How do you feed thousands of people who aren't directly involved in food production? How do you organize labor, distribute resources, maintain order, and coordinate activities across a complex social landscape where people might speak different languages, follow different customs, and pursue different occupations? How do you create systems of governance that can manage collective activities without destroying individual initiative? The development of cities coincided with the possibility of producing surplus crop yields that went far beyond what local communities could consume, allowing some members of farming communities to pursue specialized crafts, religious activities, trade, defense, and administration. But surplus alone wasn't sufficient to create cities. Urban development also required innovations in social organization, technology, and cultural practices that could support complex societies. Uruk, one of the world's first true cities and arguably the most important urban center of its time, provides a window into this extraordinary transformation. At its peak around 3000 BCE, Uruk housed perhaps 50,000 people, a staggering number for its time that represented a concentration of population density never before achieved in human history. The city developed from smaller settlements along the Euphrates River, taking advantage of fertile soil, reliable water access, and strategic location on trade routes connecting diverse regions. But Uruk's success wasn't just about favorable location. It represented innovative solutions to the challenges of urban life that required entirely new forms of human cooperation and organization. The city featured massive public buildings, including temples that rose high above the surrounding landscape and could be seen for miles. These weren't just religious structures, but community centers that served multiple functions: places of worship, storage facilities for community grain reserves, administrative centers for organizing collective labor, and symbols of civic identity that unified diverse populations. The physical layout of early cities reveals sophisticated planning that addressed practical needs while creating environments that could support complex social relationships. Cities in the Indus Valley featured dozens of streets arranged in regular grids, with large thoroughfares paved with fired bricks and smaller residential streets left unpaved to reduce construction costs. Neighborhoods were organized around courtyards that provided space for community activities, while individual houses featured private wells, drainage systems, and storage areas. Fortresses built on brick platforms and surrounded by strong walls dominated the western sections of Indus Valley cities. But these weren't just military installations. Archaeological evidence suggests they served multiple functions: defense against raiders, protection for community grain stores, residences for administrative elites, and ceremonial centers for important community rituals. The walls themselves were architectural marvels, built with precisely fitted bricks and featuring sophisticated drainage systems to prevent water damage. The development of specialized neighborhoods within cities represented a major innovation in urban planning that enhanced both efficiency and social organization. Craft quarters concentrated similar activities in specific areas, creating opportunities for knowledge sharing, quality control, and technological innovation. Residential districts were often organized by occupation or social status, with larger houses for wealthy families and smaller structures for laborers and craftspeople. Specialization became the hallmark of urban life, creating unprecedented efficiency and innovation as individuals could focus their entire lives on perfecting specific skills. City residents included merchants who specialized in long-distance trade, shopkeepers who focused on local retail, and artisans who became experts in producing copper and bronze tools, fine clay pottery, cotton textiles, and jewelry made from shells, ivory, and gold imported from distant regions. The division of labor created interdependence that required new forms of social organization and economic coordination. A pottery specialist depended on clay miners, fuel gatherers, and kiln builders for raw materials and equipment, while also relying on traders to sell finished products and farmers to provide food. This web of interdependence created both opportunities and vulnerabilities that required sophisticated management systems. The development of writing systems directly responded to urban administrative needs, but the complexity of early writing reveals just how sophisticated urban administration had become. The first documents, pictographs written on clay tablets, concerned the allocation of labor for fields, the distribution of agricultural products, the tracking of trade transactions, and the maintenance of inventories for stored goods. These weren't simple record-keeping systems, but complex administrative tools that enabled coordination of activities involving thousands of people. Early cuneiform tablets from Uruk show administrators tracking not just quantities of grain or numbers of livestock, but also specialized labor assignments, production schedules, and quality standards for manufactured goods. Some tablets record complex multi-party transactions involving the exchange of different types of goods, suggesting sophisticated understanding of relative values and market mechanisms. Urban defense became a crucial consideration as cities accumulated wealth and resources that attracted raiders from less developed regions. The stores of grain, manufactured goods, and precious materials kept by urban communities became perfect targets for raiding groups, necessitating the development of military specialists and fortified defenses. This military necessity contributed to social stratification and the emergence of warrior classes who gained prestige and resources through their role in community defense. But urban defense wasn't just about walls and weapons. It required intelligence networks to detect approaching threats, diplomatic relationships with neighboring communities, and military logistics that could supply and coordinate defensive forces. Cities developed scouts and messengers who could travel quickly across long distances, negotiators who could arrange alliances or truces, and military engineers who could design and maintain defensive installations. Trade networks expanded dramatically as cities developed specialized products for exchange with distant regions. Mesopotamian trade with the Indus Valley civilization flourished as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, with cities exchanging manufactured goods for raw materials from regions thousands of miles away. These trade relationships created cultural connections that influenced art, technology, religion, and social organization across vast geographical areas. The logistics of long-distance trade required innovations in transportation, finance, and quality control that contributed to urban development. Merchants needed standardized weights and measures to facilitate fair exchange, storage facilities to maintain goods during long journeys, and credit systems that could manage transactions across time and distance. These commercial innovations laid foundations for economic systems that persist in modified forms today. Religious practices evolved to serve urban populations in ways that differed significantly from rural agricultural communities. Temple complexes became focal points for community organization, but urban religion had to accommodate diverse populations that might come from different backgrounds and follow different traditions. Priests who presided over rituals believed necessary for successful harvests gained elite positions, and authority within urban hierarchies, but they also had to serve as cultural mediators who could maintain social cohesion among diverse populations. Urban temples often controlled significant economic resources, including agricultural land, craft workshops, and trade networks. This economic power enabled religious institutions to sponsor public works, provide social services, and maintain cultural activities that enhanced urban life. The integration of religious and economic functions created powerful institutions that could coordinate large-scale activities and maintain social order. The challenges of urban sanitation and public health required innovative solutions that represented major advances in engineering and public administration. Advanced cities like those in the Indus Valley featured sophisticated drainage systems that could handle waste from thousands of residents, indoor plumbing that brought clean water to individual houses, and what appeared to be early air conditioning devices that used evaporative cooling to moderate indoor temperatures. Public health measures included regulation of food quality, maintenance of clean water supplies, and disposal of waste in ways that prevented disease transmission. These public health systems required community-wide cooperation and central coordination that contributed to the development of urban governance institutions. Cities became laboratories for social innovation, experimenting with new forms of governance, law, and social organization that would influence human society for millennia. Social hierarchies emerged in societies able to produce food surpluses, with different groups gaining varying levels of prestige and status based on their roles in urban, economic, and social systems. These urban experiments in social organization provided models for civilizations throughout history and established patterns of social complexity that persist in modified forms today. Chapter 6. The Great Migrations continue. The success of early agricultural settlements in fertile valleys created a powerful demonstration effect that rippled across continents for thousands of years, fundamentally altering the trajectory of human development on a global scale. As news of abundant harvests and permanent communities spread through expanding trade networks and migrant communities, waves of peoples began seeking their own fertile valleys, carrying agricultural knowledge and urban innovations to new territories in what became one of history's most transformative population movements. One of the most significant drivers of agricultural spread was the actual physical migration of farming populations, as agricultural practices led to increased food production and population growth that created pressure for expansion into new territories. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing disasters or environmental collapse. They were confident pioneers, armed with proven technologies and organizational systems, seeking new opportunities to apply their knowledge and skills to unexploited landscapes. The migration patterns reveal sophisticated strategic thinking and environmental assessment, capabilities that demonstrate remarkable understanding of geographical and ecological principles. Farmers often engaged in leapfrog colonization, systematically bypassing areas deemed unsuitable for their crops and animals to settle in geographically distant but ecologically similar locations. This selective approach demonstrates detailed understanding of environmental requirements for successful agriculture and the ability to assess landscapes for agricultural potential across vast distances. European expansion provides a classic example of this systematic migration process. Agriculture spread from the Near East into Europe at an average speed of about 1 kilometer per year, a pace that seems slow by modern standards, but was actually quite rapid for prehistoric human movement. This expansion was carried by farming peoples who brought their entire technological package with them: domesticated plants and animals, agricultural tools and techniques, food processing and storage methods, and social organizations adapted to agricultural life. The migrants weren't simply carrying seeds and livestock. They were transporting complete cultural systems that had been refined over centuries of agricultural development. These systems included detailed knowledge of soil preparation, planting schedules, pest management, harvesting techniques, food processing, and storage methods that had been optimized for specific crops and environmental conditions. The Bantu expansion across Africa represents one of history's most successful and extensive agricultural migrations, demonstrating how agricultural knowledge could transform entire continents. Beginning in the second millennium BCE, Bantu-speaking peoples spread from their origins in the Benue Cross Rivers area of southeastern Nigeria across Central Africa, and later into southern Africa, carrying pastoralism and agriculture with them across distances of thousands of miles. This expansion wasn't a single migration wave, but a series of movements that unfolded over more than 1,000 years, with different groups adapting agricultural techniques to diverse African environments. The Bantu migrants displaced existing hunter-gatherer populations in some areas while integrating with them in others, creating hybrid societies that combine traditional knowledge with agricultural innovations. The success of the Bantu expansion demonstrates the transformative power of agricultural technology when applied systematically across appropriate environments. Bantu agriculture supported much higher population densities than hunting and gathering, enabling rapid population growth that provided the demographic foundation for continued expansion. This population advantage often enabled agricultural societies to expand at the expense of non-agricultural neighbors through both peaceful settlement and military conquest. Climate continued to play a crucial role in migration timing, with successful migrants learning to coordinate their movements with favorable environmental windows. Periodic warm phases every 20,000 years created green corridors that enabled human movement across previously impassable barriers, while cold periods restricted migration and sometimes forced consolidation or retreat to more favorable territories. The relationship between climate and migration wasn't simply deterministic. Human societies developed increasingly sophisticated strategies for predicting and responding to climate variability. Migrants learned to read environmental signals that indicated favorable conditions for movement, specific patterns of rainfall, vegetation growth, animal behavior, and seasonal timing that suggested opportunities for successful settlement in new territories. Technology transfer accelerated through expanding migration networks, creating feedback loops that enhanced the success of subsequent migrations. Migrants carried not just crops and animals, but entire technological systems, including tools and techniques for soil management, crop rotation, food storage, construction, and craft production. This comprehensive knowledge transfer enabled rapid agricultural development in new territories and reduced the time required for successful adaptation to new environments. Different migration strategies emerged for different types of environments, demonstrating remarkable adaptability and environmental assessment skills. In areas with continuous suitable land for agriculture, farming populations expanded gradually through a wave of advanced migration, with agricultural settlements radiating outwards over many generations. In regions with discontinuous landscapes, migrants engaged in leapfrog colonization to distant but suitable locations, often bypassing large areas of unsuitable terrain. Maritime migration opened entirely new possibilities for agricultural expansion that had been impossible during earlier phases of human development. Austronesian seafarers carried Southeast Asian food plants, including rice, across vast ocean distances, eventually reaching Madagascar and bringing Asian crops to East Africa. These ocean voyages required sophisticated navigation skills and represented some of humanity's most ambitious migration projects. The development of ocean-going vessels capable of carrying agricultural equipment, livestock, and sufficient supplies for long voyages represented major technological achievements that expanded human reach into previously inaccessible territories. These maritime technologies enabled agricultural societies to colonize islands and coastal regions that couldn't be reached, by land-based migration, creating new opportunities for agricultural development and cultural exchange. Trade relationships often preceded and facilitated agricultural migration, creating information networks that guided migration decisions and provided support for migrant communities. Trade networks between farming and non-farming communities allowed for the exchange of goods, technologies, and information about environmental conditions, resource availability, and settlement opportunities in distant regions. Commercial relationships also created pathways for gradual technology transfer that could prepare non-agricultural societies for eventual adoption of farming practices. Hunter-gatherer communities that maintained trade relationships with agricultural societies often acquired domesticated plants and animals, agricultural tools, and knowledge about farming techniques through commercial exchange before making the transition to agricultural lifestyles themselves. Intermarriage between migrant farmers and local populations created hybrid communities that combined local environmental knowledge with imported agricultural technologies. These interactions led to localized adaptations and innovations, with communities modifying agricultural techniques to suit specific environmental conditions and cultural preferences. This adaptive process enabled agriculture to succeed in diverse environments and created regional variations in agricultural practices. The cultural exchange that accompanied agricultural migration was often as important as the technology transfer, creating new forms of social organization, religious practices, and artistic expression that combined elements from different traditions. These cultural innovations enhanced the flexibility and resilience of agricultural societies and contributed to the diversity of human civilization. The demographic impact of agricultural migration was transformative, creating population distributions and density patterns that persist in modified forms today. Agricultural societies supported much higher population densities than hunter-gatherer communities, leading to dramatic population growth in regions that successfully adopted farming. This population advantage often enabled agricultural societies to expand at the expense of non-agricultural neighbors through both peaceful settlement and military conquest. Population growth also created internal pressures for continued expansion, as agricultural communities that reached the carrying capacity of their local environments had to either intensify their agricultural practices or expand into new territories. This internal dynamic of agricultural societies created a self-perpetuating cycle of expansion that continued until all suitable agricultural land had been settled. Resistance and adaptation characterized interactions between agricultural migrants and existing populations, creating diverse outcomes that range from peaceful integration to violent conflict. Some indigenous groups successfully resisted agricultural expansion, maintaining traditional lifestyles in marginal environments that weren't suitable for agriculture. Others selectively adopted agricultural technologies while preserving important cultural practices, creating diverse hybrid societies that combine traditional and agricultural elements. The success or failure of agricultural migration often depended on the ability of migrant and indigenous communities to develop mutually beneficial relationships that combine the technological advantages of agriculture with local environmental knowledge and established social networks. Communities that achieved successful integration often became centers of innovation and cultural development that influenced subsequent migrations and settlement patterns. Chapter 7. Tools that changed everything. Story of human settlement in fertile valleys is inseparable from the evolution of tools and technology. In the hands of early farmers and city builders, simple stone implements evolved into sophisticated instruments that could reshape landscapes, process food on massive scales, and create the material foundation for complex civilizations. Neolithic age tools were crucial to the beginning of permanent settlements and the agricultural revolution, representing the final stage of cultural evolution and technological development for prehistoric humans. These weren't just improved versions of earlier tools. They represented entirely new approaches to manipulating the environment. The polished stone axe stands as perhaps the most revolutionary tool of early agricultural societies. The axe and its companion adze met the need to clear land as agriculture developed, providing an efficient tree-cutting tool indispensable for slash-and-burn agriculture. Picture the backbreaking work of clearing forests with stone tools, each tree representing hours of careful, precise work, but also representing future farmland and building materials. A ground tool was chipped to rough shape and then rubbed with coarse abrasive rock to remove chip scars, followed by polishing with fine abrasive. This labor-intensive process produced tools with smooth cutting edges, superior strength, and better handling characteristics. The investment of time and effort in tool production reflects the long-term thinking characteristic of agricultural societies. The demand for quality tool stone drove some of humanity's first extractive industries. Neolithic farmers of northern Europe were completely dependent on polished axes, creating heavy demand that depleted local sources and resulted in flint mining operations across England, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Denmark, and other regions. These weren't simple quarries, but sophisticated mining operations with shaft systems and specialized production areas. Grimes Graves, northeast of London, exemplifies the scale of Neolithic tool production. The site covers 34 acres and includes both surface workings and 40-foot deep shafts with radiating galleries that exploited flint deposits under chalk beds. This represents industrial-scale production, suggesting organized labor, specialized skills, and extensive trade networks. Agricultural tools required new design principles. Farming and animal domestication required different tools and weapons than hunting and gathering, leading to innovations in cutting, digging, and processing implements. Sickles for harvesting grain, hoes for soil preparation, and grinding stones for food processing became essential elements of agricultural technology. Stone edge scrapers maintained their importance in the Neolithic toolkit, used for butchering animals and rendering hides for clothing and other purposes. These multi-purpose tools demonstrate the continuity between hunting-gathering and agricultural technologies, with established tools finding new applications in agricultural contexts. Pottery represented a revolutionary advancement in food storage and processing. The increased use of clay for building, along with the development of pottery and other clay-based artifacts, led some to refer to the Neolithic period as the Age of Clay. Pottery enabled food storage, cooking new types of meals, and creating surplus reserves essential for urban development. Metallurgy emerged as agricultural societies sought more durable and efficient tools. The earliest metallurgists worked with copper, hammering it directly into shape. But the discovery of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, produced harder, more useful tools that could maintain cutting edges longer. This technological breakthrough transformed agricultural productivity and enabled more sophisticated crafts. Textile production became increasingly important as permanent settlements developed. The appearance of weaving represented new crafts that emerged as communities could support specialized workers. Textile production required specialized tools for fiber processing, spinning, and weaving, contributing to the growing complexity of material culture. Transportation technology evolved to serve agricultural and urban needs. Draft animals, including oxen, donkeys, and camels, appeared around 4000 BCE as humans developed trade routes for transporting goods. These animals, combined with wheeled vehicles, revolutionized the movement of agricultural products and enabled trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. Tool standardization reflected growing social organization and specialization. Axe factories at mining sites produced roughed-out tools that were then finished by consumers, suggesting standardized production methods and quality control. This division of labor between tool production and tool finishing indicates sophisticated understanding of manufacturing efficiency. The psychological impact of improved tools cannot be underestimated. More efficient implements meant less time spent on basic survival tasks and more time available for social activities, religious practices, artistic expression, and innovation. This positive feedback loop accelerated technological and cultural development in agricultural societies. Chapter 8. Climate and survival. Climate shaped every aspect of early human settlement in fertile valleys, creating opportunities and challenges that tested the adaptability and ingenuity of our ancestors. The relationship between climate and human societies wasn't simply one of environmental determinism. Early humans actively responded to climate variability, developing strategies that turned environmental challenges into competitive advantages. More than 12,000 years ago, Europe's prehistoric hunter-gatherers faced extreme climate shifts brought on by the final stages of the Ice Age, with powerful effects on population size and movement across the continent. These climate fluctuations weren't just background conditions. They were active forces shaping human decisions about where to live, when to migrate, and how to organize societies. The end of the last glacial maximum, around 15,000 years ago, created entirely new landscapes for human occupation. As the climate warmed and ice melted, the Fertile Crescent became a vast, green, abundant valley, irrigated by freshwater rivers and stocked with animals suitable for domestication. This environmental transformation opened possibilities that hadn't existed during the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. Early agricultural societies developed sophisticated understanding of climate patterns and seasonal variations. The predictable flooding of the Nile, with its slow rise over months, peak in September, and recession by November, allowed Egyptians to develop systematic agricultural calendars and avoid flood damage. This environmental predictability became a foundation for social stability and long-term planning. Climate variability required adaptive strategies that could handle both abundance and scarcity. Mesopotamian weather was often hard on farmers, with unpredictable flooding and periods of drought that could ruin crops, leading to the maintenance of backup food sources like cattle and sheep. These diversification strategies reduced risk and enabled communities to survive environmental fluctuations. The population dynamics responded directly to climate conditions. During warm periods, early humans expanded into northern and northeastern Central Europe, but sharp cold snaps reduced European populations by half, with some regions becoming completely uninhabitable. These dramatic population changes required flexible social organizations capable of rapid adaptation. Migration patterns followed climate opportunities and constraints. Despite overall population collapse during cold periods, some regions like northern Italy, Poland, and northeastern Germany saw stable or rising populations, suggesting strategic migration to more favorable locations. This selective migration demonstrates sophisticated environmental assessment and decision-making capabilities. Long-term climate trends shaped agricultural development and urban growth. The Fertile Crescent in the 4th millennium BCE was more temperate than today, supporting the intensive agriculture and large populations that enabled the rise of cities and complex societies. Climate change eventually made some of these urban centers unsustainable, forcing adaptation or abandonment. Seasonal climate patterns influence social organization and cultural practices. Agricultural societies developed lives organized around seasonal planning and harvest cycles, with religious practices that worship reproduction, fertility, and natural elements crucial for agriculture. These climate-based cultural practices reinforced social cohesion and transmitted environmental knowledge across generations. environmental degradation resulted from intensive agricultural practices, creating feedback loops between human activity and climate conditions. Intensive farming, deforestation, and irrigation gradually degraded the environment of the Fertile Crescent, making once rich regions largely uninhabitable within a millennium. This environmental decline forced continued migration and expansion. Climate stress drove technological innovation and social cooperation. Ice Age conditions created pressure for human adaptation, leading to innovations in toolmaking, clothing, production, shelter construction, and food storage. These technological advances enabled survival in challenging environments and provided foundations for later agricultural and urban development. Ocean currents and maritime climate conditions influenced migration routes and settlement patterns. Warm ocean currents during the last ice age created milder coastal climates that supported early human migration from Asia to North America, providing refuges during otherwise harsh climatic periods. These marine climate effects extended human reach into previously inaccessible territories. Regional climate differences created diverse environmental niches that supported different survival strategies. Even during generally harsh climatic periods, local environmental conditions could vary significantly, with some areas remaining habitable while others became uninhabitable. This environmental diversity encouraged the development of varied cultural and technological adaptations. Chapter 9. Social Revolutions. The transition from small bands of hunter-gatherers to complex agricultural societies required fundamental changes in how humans organized themselves socially. In fertile valleys around the world, successful agricultural communities experimented with new forms of social organization that would lay the foundation for civilization itself. Probably the most significant change that took place with the Neolithic Revolution was a dramatic increase in population, as more food could sustain more people living together, transforming small bands into villages. This population growth wasn't just quantitative. It fundamentally altered the nature of human social relationships and required new systems for organizing collective life. The development of social hierarchy emerged from practical necessities of agricultural life. The stores of grain kept by agricultural communities became perfect targets for raiding groups, requiring some members to specialize in defense, while priests who presided over fertility rituals and skilled craftsmen gained elevated status. These functional specializations gradually evolved into permanent social classes. Property concepts underwent revolutionary changes as communities invested in land improvement and infrastructure. Sedentary agricultural communities could accumulate goods and tools in ways impossible for mobile hunter-gatherers, leading to new concepts of ownership and inheritance. The ability to store surplus and pass it to descendants created new forms of social differentiation and economic inequality. Labor organization became increasingly complex as agricultural communities grew. Large construction projects like circular ditches, burial mounds, and ceremonial enclosures required considerable time and labor, suggesting that influential individuals could organize and direct human effort. These projects demonstrate emerging leadership structures and the ability to mobilize community resources for collective goals. Gender roles evolved as agricultural societies developed new economic activities and social structures. Traditional hunter-gatherer societies had clear gender divisions for labor, with men hunting and women gathering. But agricultural societies created new forms of work that didn't map neatly onto these traditional divisions. This led to renegotiation of gender roles and the development of new social arrangements. Religious and ceremonial practices became more elaborate as communities had resources to invest in non-productive activities. Religious artifacts and artistic imagery appeared at the earliest Neolithic settlements, suggesting that spiritual and aesthetic concerns emerged alongside practical agricultural innovations. These cultural developments reflected communities' growing confidence and social sophistication. Conflict resolution mechanisms became essential as larger communities dealt with disputes and competing interests. Archaeological evidence suggests some Neolithic communities remained relatively egalitarian, with little difference in house sizes or burial sites, indicating development of social mechanisms for maintaining equality despite growing complexity. These egalitarian experiments represent important alternatives to hierarchical organization. Trade relationships created new forms of social connection between distant communities. Trade networks between settlements facilitated communication and the sharing of ideas and technologies, creating cultural connections that transcended local community boundaries. These commercial relationships laid foundations for larger political and cultural units. Specialization created new social identities and professional communities. As craftsmen and artisans arose in agricultural societies, tools and technology became more efficient and complex, leading to the development of specialized knowledge and professional guilds. These professional identities provided new bases for social organization beyond kinship and territory. Educational systems emerged to transmit increasingly complex technical and cultural knowledge. Institutional memory through symbolic storytelling gave early agricultural communities a relationship with environmental forces and supernatural powers that governed their world. These knowledge transmission systems enabled communities to preserve and build upon accumulated wisdom. Legal and administrative systems developed to manage complex agricultural and urban societies. The first written documents dealt with allocation of labor for fields and distribution of agricultural products, indicating the development of formal administrative systems. These administrative innovations enabled coordination of large-scale activities and resource management. Social mobility mechanisms allowed individuals to change their status within community hierarchies. Elite positions could be gained through religious authority, military skill, or craft specialization, suggesting that early agricultural societies maintained some flexibility in social arrangements. This mobility helped maintain social cohesion and provided incentives for individual achievement. Chapter 10. The spread of innovation in early agricultural societies didn't occur in isolation. Ideas, technologies, and cultural practices spread rapidly through expanding networks of trade, migration, and cultural exchange. The fertile valleys that nurtured early civilizations became nodes in vast communication, networks that accelerated human development across continents. Rivers provided benefits beyond agriculture, including fish for food and fertilizer, reeds and clay for building materials, and transportation routes that facilitated trade and communication. These waterway networks became highways for innovation, carrying new ideas and technologies across vast distances with remarkable speed. Writing systems exemplify how crucial innovations spread between civilizations. The world's earliest known writing system, cuneiform, developed in Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE for record keeping and administrative purposes, but quickly evolved to record literature, scientific knowledge, and religious texts. This administrative innovation transformed how human societies could preserve and transmit knowledge. Technological transfer occurred through multiple mechanisms, including direct migration, trade relationships, and cultural exchange. Mesopotamian trade with the Indus Valley civilization as early as the 3rd millennium BCE enabled the exchange of not just goods, but also technological knowledge and cultural practices. These long-distance relationships created opportunities for innovation adoption and adaptation. Agricultural innovations spread through farming networks with remarkable efficiency. The spread of agriculture from the Near East occurred through actual migration of farming peoples who carried their complete technological package to new territories. This comprehensive technology transfer enabled rapid agricultural development in regions that had never previously practiced farming. Metallurgical knowledge spread through specialized artisan networks that transcended cultural and political boundaries. Bronze technology, requiring knowledge of copper and tin sources, plus sophisticated heating and mixing techniques, spread across diverse societies despite the complexity of the production process. This suggests active communication between metalworking specialists across vast distances. Maritime technologies enabled innovation transfer across ocean barriers that had previously isolated human populations. Austronesian seafarers carried technological innovations, including outrigger canoes and wetland cultivation across the Pacific, bringing Southeast Asian innovations to previously isolated populations. These ocean voyages created new possibilities for technological exchange. Urban planning concepts spread between early cities through trade and diplomatic contacts. Sophisticated urban features like street planning, drainage systems, and defensive fortifications appeared in multiple early civilizations, suggesting shared knowledge about urban design and engineering. These similarities indicate active communication between urban planners and administrators. Religious and ceremonial innovations spread through cultural networks that complemented trade relationships. Similar religious artifacts and artistic styles appeared across wide geographical areas, indicating the spread of spiritual and aesthetic concepts alongside material technologies. These cultural exchanges created shared symbolic systems that facilitated further communication. Educational institutions and knowledge preservation systems spread as societies recognized the value of systematic learning. The development of papyrus as a portable writing medium facilitated the spread of written knowledge beyond the clay tablet systems of Mesopotamia. These portable knowledge systems accelerated the diffusion of innovations, mathematical and astronomical. Knowledge spread through scholarly networks that connected early civilizations. Calendar systems, astronomical observations, and mathematical concepts appeared in multiple early civilizations, suggesting active communication between learned specialists. These intellectual exchanges laid foundations for scientific development. Legal and administrative innovations spread through diplomatic and commercial contacts between early states. Similar legal concepts and administrative practices appeared in diverse early civilizations, indicating shared solutions to common governmental challenges. These institutional innovations enabled the management of increasingly complex societies. Military technologies and strategies spread rapidly through conflict and alliance relationships between early civilizations. Weapons technologies, fortification designs, and tactical innovations moved quickly across cultural boundaries as societies sought advantages in warfare. These military exchanges accelerated technological development and influenced social organization. Chapter 11. Legacy of the Valleys. The fertile valleys where early humans first established permanent settlements continue to shape our world today, their influence extending far beyond their geographical boundaries to influence everything from modern agriculture to contemporary urban planning. The innovations pioneered in these ancient landscapes laid the foundation for virtually every aspect of modern civilization. Life today, including our governments, specialized labor, and trade, is directly related to the advances made in the Neolithic Revolution. When you walk through a modern city, shop in a supermarket, or use written language, you're experiencing the direct descendants of innovations first developed in the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, the Nile, the Indus, and the Yellow River. Modern Agriculture remains fundamentally dependent on principles discovered by early farmers in these valleys. 90% of our calories today come from foods that were domesticated in the first wave of the agricultural revolution. The wheat, barley, rice, and other staple crops that feed the world's population trace their domestication to these early agricultural experiments. Contemporary irrigation systems employ techniques pioneered thousands of years ago in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. Modern crop rotation practices, including the alternating of legumes with cereals to prevent soil depletion, were first developed along the Nile River. These ancient innovations remain essential for sustainable agriculture in the 21st century. Urban planning principles developed in early cities continue to influence modern metropolitan design. Features like planned street layouts, sophisticated drainage systems, and zone districts for different activities first appeared in Indus Valley cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Contemporary city planners still grapple with the same fundamental challenges of moving people, managing waste, and organizing space efficiently. Modern legal and administrative systems trace their origins to innovations developed in early agricultural societies. The use of written records for resource allocation, labor organization, and dispute resolution first appeared in Mesopotamian cities. Contemporary bureaucracies, legal codes, and governmental institutions represent evolved versions of administrative innovations pioneered in ancient fertile valleys. Educational systems and knowledge preservation methods developed in early civilizations provide models for contemporary learning institutions. The concept of preserving knowledge through written records, specialized schools, and professional training programs originated in early urban civilizations. Modern universities, libraries, and educational curricula represent sophisticated versions of knowledge systems first developed in ancient cities. Global trade networks that connect the modern world. Economy evolved from commercial relationships established between early civilizations. Trade routes connecting Mesopotamia with the Indus Valley and other distant regions created precedents for international commerce and cultural exchange. Contemporary globalization represents an expanded version of interconnectedness that began in these early fertile valleys. Environmental challenges faced by modern societies mirror problems first encountered by early agricultural civilizations. Intensive farming, deforestation, and resource depletion that eventually degraded the Fertile Crescent provide cautionary examples for contemporary environmental management. The environmental history of these regions offers valuable lessons for sustainable development. Social organization principles developed in early agricultural societies continue to influence contemporary communities. Concepts of specialization, social hierarchy, and collective organization pioneered in ancient settlements provide frameworks for understanding modern social structures. Contemporary discussions about inequality, social mobility, and community organization often echo debates that began in early agricultural societies. Technological innovation patterns established in early civilizations remain relevant for contemporary development. The progression from simple tools to complex manufacturing systems, from individual production to industrial operations, first appeared in Neolithic mining and tool production. Modern technological development follows similar patterns of increasing complexity and specialization. Climate adaptation strategies developed by early agricultural societies offer insights for contemporary climate change responses. Early human responses to climate variability, including migration, technological adaptation, and social reorganization, provide models for addressing current environmental challenges. The resilience demonstrated by early agricultural societies offers hope and guidance for modern climate adaptation. Cultural and artistic traditions that began in early agricultural societies continue to influence contemporary creativity and expression. The development of pottery, weaving, and other artistic crafts in early settlements, established traditions of creative expression that persist in modern cultures worldwide. Contemporary arts and crafts often employ techniques and aesthetic principles first developed in ancient, fertile valleys. The information networks that connect our modern world through the internet and digital communications represent a sophisticated evolution of the trade and communication systems first established between ancient fertile valleys. When you send an email from New York to Tokyo, the data packets follow routing protocols that mirror the way ancient merchants navigated trade routes between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, seeking the most efficient paths while adapting to obstacles and changing conditions. The development of the World Wide Web itself follows patterns established by early urban planners who had to organize information flow within complex cities. Just as ancient administrators in Uruk developed filing systems for clay tablets that enabled quick retrieval of specific information, modern database architecture employs hierarchical and relational structures that allow instant access to vast stores of digital information. The principles of categorization, cross-referencing, and systematic organization that enable Google search algorithms to process billions of web pages trace their intellectual ancestry to Mesopotamian scribes who first grappled with organizing complex information systems. Silicon Valley's approach to innovation and entrepreneurship reflects social structures pioneered in ancient trading cities. The venture capital model that funds technological startups operates remarkably similarly to the merchant financing systems that supported long-distance trade in the ancient world. Just as Mesopotamian traders pooled resources to fund caravans to distant markets, modern investors collaborate to support technological ventures that may take years to yield returns. The risk-sharing mechanisms, profit distribution systems, and partnership agreements that govern modern technology companies would be familiar to ancient merchants who developed similar structures to manage commercial uncertainty. The specialized knowledge clusters that characterize modern technology centers, biotechnology in Boston, aerospace in Seattle, entertainment in Los Angeles, replicate the craft specialization patterns first developed in ancient cities. Just as bronze working expertise concentrated in specific neighborhoods of early urban centers, creating innovation ecosystems where knowledge transferred rapidly between practitioners, modern technology clusters benefit from the same proximity, effects that enable rapid information exchange and collaborative innovation. Agricultural technology. From ancient seeds to genetic engineering, modern agricultural biotechnology represents a direct evolution of the plant breeding and selection techniques first developed by Neolithic farmers in fertile valleys. When contemporary agricultural scientists use CRISPR gene editing to develop drought-resistant crops, they're applying sophisticated tools to achieve the same goals, pursued by ancient farmers who selected seeds from the most productive plants. The fundamental principle remains unchanged: human intervention in plant reproduction to enhance characteristics that benefit human needs. The development of genetically modified organisms, GMOs, follows innovation patterns established in ancient agricultural centers. Early farmers in the Fertile Crescent engaged in what we would now call biotechnology, when they systematically bred wheat varieties with non-shattering seed heads that made harvesting more efficient. This genetic modification, achieved through selective breeding rather than laboratory techniques, represented the same type of purposeful intervention in plant genetics that characterizes modern agricultural biotechnology. Contemporary precision agriculture, which uses GPS guidance, soil sensors, and drone monitoring to optimize crop production, represents a technological enhancement of the environmental observation skills that ancient farmers developed to manage complex irrigation systems. Farmers in ancient Mesopotamia had to monitor soil moisture, predict weather patterns, and time agricultural activities with precision that required systematic observation and data analysis. Modern agricultural technology provides more sophisticated tools for gathering and processing this information, but the fundamental approach to agricultural management remains rooted in principles established thousands of years ago. The global food distribution systems that prevent famines and enable dietary diversity worldwide evolved from trade networks that connected ancient agricultural centers. The complex logistics required to transport fresh produce from California farms to supermarkets in New York involve supply chain management techniques that build on innovations first developed to move grain from Egyptian farms to urban markets in Alexandria. The principles of preservation, transportation, quality control, and inventory management that enable modern food systems trace their origins to solutions pioneered by ancient agricultural societies, vertical farming, and controlled environment. Agriculture represent modern applications of the environmental manipulation techniques first developed in ancient irrigation systems. When contemporary farmers grow crops in climate-controlled facilities with artificial lighting and hydroponic nutrient delivery, they're applying technological solutions to the same challenges faced by ancient farmers who built terraces, constructed greenhouses, and developed irrigation systems to create optimal growing conditions. The underlying principle, human modification of environmental conditions to enhance agricultural productivity, remains constant across millennia. Urban planning. Ancient wisdom for modern cities. The challenges facing contemporary urban planners: traffic congestion, housing affordability, environmental sustainability, social equity. Mirror problems first encountered and addressed by planners in ancient cities. The solutions developed in places like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro continue to influence modern urban design in ways that are both obvious and subtle. The concept of zoning, which separates residential, commercial, and industrial areas in modern cities, originated in ancient urban centers where craft production, religious activities, and residential areas were organized into distinct districts. Contemporary mixed-use development, which integrates residential and commercial functions to create walkable neighborhoods, represents a return to the integrated urban design principles employed in many ancient cities where people lived close to their work and daily needs. Public transportation systems in modern cities employ network design principles first developed for ancient urban infrastructure. The hub-and-spoke patterns that characterize subway systems and bus networks replicate the radial street patterns that connected central civic areas with residential neighborhoods in ancient cities. The principles of accessibility, efficiency, and coverage that guide modern transportation planning were first articulated by planners who had to move people and goods efficiently through dense urban environments without motorized vehicles. Smart city technologies that use sensors and data analytics to manage urban systems represent sophisticated applications of the systematic observation and management techniques developed by ancient urban administrators. When modern city managers use traffic sensors to optimize signal timing or monitor air quality to manage pollution, they're employing technological tools to achieve the same goals pursued by ancient administrators who had to manage complex urban systems without electronic monitoring capabilities. The sustainable city movement, which seeks to create urban environments that minimize environmental impact while maximizing livability, draws inspiration from ancient cities that achieved remarkable sustainability through efficient resource use and waste management. The circular economy principles that guide modern sustainability efforts, reducing waste, reusing materials, recycling resources, were standard practice in ancient cities, where resources were too valuable to waste and where urban survival depended on efficient resource management. Social innovation. Ancient institutions in modern form, modern democratic institutions, trace their conceptual origins to the collective decision-making processes developed in early agricultural communities. The town hall meetings, citizen assemblies, and participatory democracy experiments that characterize contemporary civic engagement represent evolved forms of the community decision-making processes that enabled ancient agricultural societies to coordinate collective activities and resolve disputes. The cooperative movement, which enables people to pool resources for mutual benefit through credit unions, housing cooperatives, and worker-owned businesses, represents a modern application of the collective resource management systems first developed in ancient agricultural communities. The principles of shared ownership, democratic governance, and mutual aid that characterize modern cooperatives were essential elements of the social organization that enabled early agricultural societies to manage irrigation systems, coordinate harvests, and provide security for community members. Contemporary social entrepreneurship, which applies business methods to address social problems, follows patterns established by ancient civic institutions that combined economic and social functions. Temple complexes in ancient cities served simultaneously as religious centers, economic institutions, and social service providers, demonstrating the integration of spiritual, economic, and social activities that characterizes modern social enterprises. The nonprofit sector, which provides services and advocates for causes that benefit society rather than generating profit for shareholders, represents an institutional evolution of the civic and religious organizations that provided public services. In ancient cities, the governance structures, fundraising methods, and service delivery approaches employed by modern nonprofits would be familiar to administrators of ancient temples and civic institutions that served similar functions in early urban societies. Modern human rights movements draw conceptual foundations from the legal and ethical innovations developed in ancient law codes. The principle that laws should apply equally to all members of society, regardless of social status, was first articulated in legal codes like Hammurabi's Code that established standardized punishments for similar crimes. Contemporary human rights law represents an expansion and refinement of legal principles first developed to manage justice in complex ancient societies. Environmental management. Learning from ancient mistakes and successes, the environmental challenges facing modern societies, climate change, resource depletion, pollution, biodiversity loss, parallel problems that contributed to the decline of some ancient civilizations, while others successfully adapted and flourished. The environmental history of ancient fertile valleys provides both cautionary examples and successful models for contemporary environmental management. The salinization problems that degraded agricultural land in parts of ancient Mesopotamia provide direct lessons for modern irrigation projects. Contemporary agricultural engineers study ancient irrigation failures to design modern systems that avoid the soil chemistry problems that made once fertile land unusable. The experience of ancient farmers who learned to manage salt buildup through crop rotation, drainage improvements, and water management techniques provides practical guidance for maintaining soil health in irrigated agriculture. Deforestation patterns in ancient civilizations offer insights into sustainable forest management for modern societies. Some ancient societies, like those on Easter Island, experienced ecological collapse due to unsustainable resource extraction, while others, like many ancient Chinese civilizations, developed forest management practices that sustained timber production for centuries. These historical examples provide case studies for contemporary forest management and renewable resource policies. The urban sustainability achievements of ancient cities, like those in the Indus Valley, demonstrate the possibility of creating densely populated settlements with minimal environmental impact. The water management, waste disposal, and resource efficiency techniques employed in these cities show that urban sustainability isn't just a modern goal, but an achievable objective that has been accomplished by human societies in the past. Climate adaptation strategies developed by ancient societies provide models for contemporary responses to climate change. Ancient civilizations that successfully adapted to climate variability through crop diversification, water storage, population mobility, and technological innovation demonstrate that human societies can maintain prosperity while adapting to environmental change. These historical examples provide hope and practical guidance for modern climate adaptation efforts. Economic systems. Ancient principles in global markets. Modern international trade operates according to principles first established by merchants trading between ancient civilizations. The letters of credit that enable contemporary international commerce evolved from the trust networks and financial instruments developed by ancient traders who needed reliable methods for conducting business across vast distances with people they might never meet in person. The commodity exchanges that determine global prices for agricultural products, metals, and energy resources employ price discovery mechanisms that trace their origins to ancient marketplaces where buyers and sellers negotiated values for goods. The concept of standardized grades and qualities that enable modern commodity trading was first developed by ancient merchants who needed consistent standards for evaluating goods in long-distance trade. Supply chain management, which coordinates the movement of goods from producers to consumers through complex networks of suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, and retailers, represents a sophisticated evolution of the trade networks that connected ancient civilizations. The just-in-time delivery systems that characterize modern logistics employ timing and coordination, principles first developed by ancient traders who had to synchronize production, transportation, and delivery across seasonal cycles and long distances. Modern banking systems evolved from the financial institutions first developed in ancient trading cities to manage the credit, currency exchange, and investment services needed for complex commerce. The interest rates, loan terms, and risk assessment methods employed by contemporary banks represent refined versions of financial tools, first developed by ancient lenders who had to evaluate creditworthiness and manage financial risk in uncertain economic environments. The insurance industry, which provides financial protection against various risks, evolved from the risk-sharing arrangements developed by ancient merchants to protect against losses from theft, shipwreck, or other hazards of long-distance trade. The actuarial methods used to calculate insurance premiums employ statistical techniques that build on the empirical risk assessment methods developed by ancient traders who had to estimate probabilities and potential losses. Cultural legacy. Artistic and intellectual traditions. The artistic traditions that characterize contemporary culture, pottery, textiles, metalworking, sculpture, and decorative arts represent continuous evolution of creative practices first developed in ancient agricultural societies. The aesthetic principles, technical methods, and symbolic systems employed by modern artists often trace their origins to innovations first developed in ancient craft workshops. Contemporary architecture employs structural principles, proportional systems, and spatial organization concepts that were first articulated by builders in ancient cities. The classical orders that influence formal architecture worldwide originated in ancient Mediterranean civilizations, while the urban planning principles that guide contemporary city design trace their origins to ancient urban centers. Modern literary traditions, including epic poetry, historical narratives, and philosophical texts, evolved from the oral and written traditions first developed in ancient civilizations. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's earliest literary works, established narrative structures and thematic concerns that continue to influence contemporary literature. The historical chronicles, legal codes, and administrative records produced in ancient civilizations established documentation practices that enable modern historical research and governmental administration, educational institutions and scholarly practices employed in contemporary universities represent evolved forms of the knowledge transmission systems developed in ancient civilizations. The concept of specialized schools for training professionals, the practice of preserving knowledge through written texts, and the institutional structures that support scholarly research all trace their origins to educational innovations first. Developed in ancient urban centers, the scientific method, which guides contemporary research and technological development, evolved from the systematic observation and experimental practices first developed by ancient farmers, engineers, and craftspeople who had to understand natural processes to achieve practical goals. The empirical approach to knowledge that characterizes modern science represents a refinement of investigative methods first employed by ancient innovators, who made discoveries through careful observation and systematic experimentation. Future perspectives. Ancient wisdom for tomorrow's challenges as humanity faces unprecedented global challenges. Climate change, resource scarcity, technological disruption, social inequality. The experience of ancient civilizations provides valuable guidance for developing solutions that are both effective and sustainable. The long-term perspective available through historical analysis enables contemporary societies to learn from both the successes and failures of past civilizations. The resilience demonstrated by ancient societies that successfully adapted to environmental change provides hope and practical guidance for contemporary climate adaptation efforts. Civilizations that survived and flourished through climate variability developed strategies for maintaining social cohesion, economic productivity, and environmental sustainability that remain relevant for modern societies facing similar challenges. The technological innovation patterns established in ancient civilizations suggest that sustainable technological development requires integration of environmental, social, and economic considerations rather than narrow focus on technical capabilities alone. Ancient technologies that remain useful for centuries or millennia were typically those that enhanced human capabilities while working within natural systems rather than attempting to dominate or replace them. The social organization experiments conducted in ancient civilizations provide models for contemporary efforts to create more equitable and sustainable societies. The cooperative institutions, democratic practices, and social support systems developed in ancient communities demonstrate that alternatives to purely competitive or hierarchical social organization are not only possible, but can be highly effective for maintaining social prosperity and individual well-being. The environmental management practices developed in ancient civilizations offer practical guidance for creating sustainable relationships between human societies and natural systems. The agricultural techniques, resource management practices, and urban planning approaches that enabled ancient civilizations to flourish for centuries provide tested models for contemporary sustainability efforts. Perhaps most importantly, the experience of ancient civilizations demonstrates that human societies are capable of remarkable innovation, adaptation, and cooperation when facing existential challenges. The creativity, resilience, and wisdom displayed by our ancestors in fertile valleys provide inspiration and confidence that contemporary humanity can successfully address the challenges of the 21st century and beyond. As we conclude this extraordinary journey through the fertile valleys that shaped human history, we return to that pivotal moment 75,000 years ago when our ancestors stood at the edge of Africa, contemplating the unknown territories that lay beyond the familiar horizons of their homeland. What we've discovered through decades of archaeological research, genetic analysis, and scientific investigation is that these early humans weren't simply wandering into an uncertain future driven by desperation or blind hope. They were following carefully planned routes toward landscapes that would prove ideal for human settlement and development. Guided by sophisticated environmental knowledge and strategic thinking that rivals modern planning capabilities, the story of human spread across fertile valleys reveals remarkable consistency in human behavior across time and space that speaks to fundamental aspects of our species' character and capabilities. From the Fertile Crescent to the Nile Delta, from the Indus Valley to the Yellow River Basin, early humans demonstrated sophisticated environmental assessment, strategic planning, adaptive innovation, and collaborative organization that enabled them to identify and exploit the most promising landscapes on Earth. They didn't simply stumble upon good agricultural land through random wandering. They actively sought it out, recognizing intuitively what we now understand scientifically about the complex relationships between river systems, soil fertility, climate patterns, and agricultural potential. The innovations pioneered in these early settlements, agriculture, irrigation, cities, writing, specialized labor, and complex social organization, continue to shape our world today in ways that are both obvious and subtle. Every time you eat bread made from wheat first domesticated in the Fertile Crescent, use written language that evolved from Mesopotamian cuneiform, or live in a city planned according to principles first developed in Indus Valley urban centers, you're experiencing the direct legacy of decisions made by early humans in fertile valleys thousands of years ago. These ancient innovations aren't simply historical curiosities or primitive precursors to modern technology. They're the living foundation of contemporary civilization, continuously refined and elaborated, but fundamentally unchanged in their essential principles. The agricultural techniques developed in these valleys remain the basis for food production systems that feed billions of people worldwide. Modern crop varieties still derive primarily from plants first domesticated by early farmers, with 90% of our calories today coming from foods that were domesticated in the first wave of the agricultural revolution. The irrigation systems that enable farming in arid regions continue to employ principles of water management first discovered in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, while contemporary soil management practices, including crop rotation and fertilization techniques, represent sophisticated versions of innovations pioneered thousands of years ago.